The coffee at Henderson Municipal Airport tasted like it had been brewing since the Clinton administration. But at 6:30 a.m. on a Thursday in late September, it was the only thing standing between me and complete exhaustion. I'd driven 3 hours from Phoenix to catch this charter flight to Sacramento, where my pharmaceutical company was hosting what they euphemistically called a strategic realignment conference. Translation: layoffs disguised as team building. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The terminal building looked like it had been designed by someone who thought airports should resemble bus stations from the 1970s. Beige walls, fluorescent lighting that hummed like angry bees, and vinyl chairs that had witnessed more broken dreams than a divorce court. I was the only passenger waiting in the departure lounge, clutching my briefcase like a shield and rehearsing the presentation that might save my job. At 34, I thought I had life figured out. Marketing director at Bristol Chun Pharmaceuticals. Corner office with a view of the parking garage, company car that still smelled like success. My apartment in Scottsdale had granite countertops and a swimming pool I never used. My mother called it living the dream. I called it Tuesday, the automatic. Doors wheezed open, letting in a gust of desert air that carried the scent of sage and aviation fuel. A woman in a navy blue pilot's uniform walked in, her silver hair pulled back in a practical ponytail that caught the harsh terminal lighting. She moved with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing exactly where you're going, even when everyone else is lost. Emma Rodriguez? Her voice had the warm rasp of someone who'd spent years talking over engine noise. That's me. I stood up, smoothing my pencil skirt and trying to look like the kind of person who belonged on private jets. You must be my pilot, Captain Sarah Mitchell. She extended a firm handshake. Hope you don't mind flying in something older than a smartphone. Our usual aircraft is down for maintenance, so we're taking Betsy. Betsy? 1987 Cessna Citation. She's got character. Sarah's smile revealed laugh lines that suggested she found humor in places others might find problems. Coffee any good here? Depends on your definition of good. Fair enough. She walked over to the vending machine and fed it a crumpled dollar bill. The machine hummed, clicked, and dispensed nothing. Sarah gave it a gentle kick with the toe of her boot. Still nothing. She shrugged and turned back to me. Guess that's a sign we should get going. Weather window looks perfect, but these mountain airports can be tricky once the afternoon thermals start cooking. I followed her through a side door that led directly onto the tarmac. The Citation sat gleaming in the morning sun, white with blue racing stripes that had faded to the color of old denim. Up close, it looked less like a luxury aircraft and more like a well-maintained vintage car with wings. She's been good to me for 8 years, Sarah said, running her hand along the fuselage like she was petting a favorite horse. Bought her from a real estate mogul who thought bigger was always better. He traded up to a G650 and probably regrets it every time he pays the fuel bill. The cabin was smaller than I'd expected, with cream-colored leather seats that had developed the kind of patina that comes from thousands of miles and hundreds of passengers. Sarah stowed my briefcase in a small compartment and gestured toward the front-facing seats. Pick your spot. We've got about 2.5 hours to Sacramento, depending on winds. Should be smooth sailing once we get above the bumps. I chose the window seat and buckled myself in, watching Sarah go through her pre-flight routine with the methodical precision of someone who'd done this dance thousands of times before. She checked switches, tested controls, and spoke into her headset in the abbreviated language pilots used to communicate with air traffic control. Henderson ground, Citation 779 Delta Mike, ready to taxi with information Charlie. The engine spooled up with a whine that vibrated through the cabin. Sarah turned in her seat and looked back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Emma, can I ask you something before we take off?" "Sure. You nervous about this meeting?" The question caught me off guard. Pilots weren't supposed to be therapists. They were supposed to get you from point A to point B while making small talk about the weather and pointing out landmarks through the window. "A little," I admitted. "Big presentation. Lot writing on it." "What kind of presentation?" "Marketing strategy for a new arthritis medication. 18 months of research, focus groups, demographic analysis, the works." Sarah nodded slowly, her eyes studying my face with the intensity of someone reading weather patterns. "And you believe in this medication?" Another unexpected question. I'd prepared for inquiries about market penetration and competitive positioning, not pharmaceutical ethics at 30,000 feet. "It's effective. Clinical trials show significant improvement in joint mobility and pain reduction." "That's not what I asked." The engines grew louder as we rolled toward the runway. Through the window, I could see the control tower and a handful of smaller aircraft tied down against the morning wind. Sarah's question hung in the air between us like turbulence waiting to happen. "I believe in doing my job well," I said finally. "Henderson Tower, citation 779 Delta Mike, ready for departure runway 06. Citation 779 Delta Mike, Henderson Tower, cleared for takeoff runway 06. Fly heading 090. Contact departure on 1-2-4-point-7. Sarah's hands moved across the controls with practiced ease, but she kept glancing back at me in the reflection of the windscreen. "You know what I learned in my 23 years of flying?" The aircraft began to accelerate down the runway, pressing me back into my seat. The desert landscape started to blur past the windows as we picked up speed. "What's that?" "The most dangerous flights aren't the ones where the weather's bad or the equipment's questionable. They're the ones where you're flying to the wrong destination." We lifted off smoothly, the ground falling away beneath us as Henderson shrunk to the size of a model train set. Sarah banked to the northeast, and I watched the sprawling suburbs of Las Vegas slide past below us, swimming pools glinting like scattered coins in the morning light. "I'm not sure I follow," I said, though something in my chest was beginning to flutter in a way that had nothing to do with the climb. 3 years ago, I had a passenger flying to Denver for a job interview. Fortune 500 company, executive position, salary that would have made his mortgage payment look like pocket change. Guy was miserable the entire flight. Kept checking his phone, practicing his answers out loud, sweating through a $1,000 suit. Sarah leveled off at our cruising altitude and engaged the autopilot. The cabin grew quieter, filled only with the steady hum of engines and the whisper of air flowing over the wings. Halfway there, he asked me to turn around. Said he'd rather be broke and happy than rich and dead inside. So we flew back to Phoenix, and he called his girlfriend from the tarmac. Proposed right there next to the fuel truck. Did he regret it? Last Christmas, I got a card from him. He's running a food truck in Flagstaff with his wife. 3 kids, a mortgage on a fixer-upper, and the biggest smile I've ever seen in a photograph. The landscape below had changed from desert scrub to pine forests. As we crossed into California, snow-capped peaks stretched to the horizon, and I found myself wondering when I'd last taken the time to notice something beautiful, just for the sake of noticing it. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Sarah reached into her flight bag and pulled out a thermos, unscrewing the cap to release the rich aroma of real coffee. She poured some into a paper cup and handed it back to me. "Because in about an hour and 45 minutes, we're going to land in Sacramento, and you're going to walk into that conference room and give a presentation about a medication that costs $400 a month for people whose average Social Security check is $1,200. The coffee was excellent, dark and smooth with just a hint of cinnamon. It tasted like the kind of thing you drink while watching sunrise from a cabin porch, not while flying toward a corporate meeting that might determine your future. How do you know what the medication costs? My mother takes it. Arthritis in her hands got so bad she couldn't hold a coffee cup without crying. Insurance covers 60% if she's lucky. She chooses between her medication and her groceries. About twice a month. Something cold settled in my stomach that had nothing to do with altitude. I'd spent 18 months studying demographics and market penetration, but I'd never sat across a kitchen table from someone trying to choose between pain relief and paying the electric bill. The clinical trials show it's effective, I said, hearing how hollow the words sounded at altitude. I'm sure they do. But effective for who? The patients who need it, or the shareholders who profit from it? We flew in silence for several minutes. The only sound the steady drone of engines carrying us toward a destination I was beginning to question. Below us, the Sacramento Valley spread out like a patchwork quilt. Agricultural fields divided by irrigation canals that caught the morning light like silver thread. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sarah, can I ask you something? Shoot. How did you become a pilot? She laughed, a sound warm enough to chase away the chill I'd been feeling. Pure stubbornness. Grew up in a house where my father thought women belonged in kitchens, and my mother thought dreams belonged in fairy tales. Joined the Air Force the day after I turned 18. Learned to fly cargo planes, and spent the next decade proving them both wrong. Any regrets? About flying? Never. About the years I spent trying to make other people happy? That's a longer conversation. The Sacramento airport appeared on the horizon, control towers and runways laid out in geometric precision against the sprawling urban landscape. Sarah began her descent checklist, but her eyes kept finding mine in the reflection of the instrument panel. Emma, what made you choose pharmaceutical marketing? Another question I wasn't prepared for. The honest answer involved student loans, a recession-era job market, and a series of compromises that had seemed practical at the time. It chose me, I guess. Right degree, right timing, right company recruiting on campus. And if money wasn't a factor, if you could do anything? The question hung between us like a challenge. Through the window, I could see cars moving along highways like blood cells through arteries, everyone rushing toward destinations that might or might not be worth the journey. I wanted to be a teacher, I said, the word surprising me with their clarity. Elementary school. Maybe 3rd or 4th grade, when kids still think learning is an adventure instead of a chore. What happened to that dream? Reality. Teacher salaries, student loans, practical considerations. My parents convinced me that business was more stable, more financially secure. And are you? Secure? The question felt like turbulence, shaking. Something loose inside me that I'd kept carefully fastened down for years. I thought about my corner office, my company car, my granite countertops that I ate frozen dinners over while checking emails until midnight. Financially, yes. Otherwise? I shrugged. I honestly don't know anymore. The Sacramento approach vectored us for the final approach, and Sarah's hands returned to the controls with the easy competence of someone who'd landed thousands of times in dozens of airports. But her voice carried a weight that hadn't been there during takeoff. Emma, I'm going to tell you something that might sound crazy. I'm listening. We don't have to land in Sacramento. The words hit me like clear air turbulence, unexpected and disorienting. What do you mean? I mean this airplane has enough fuel to fly for another 3 hours. We could go anywhere within 1,000 miles. Portland, Seattle, Denver, Albuquerque. We could follow the coast to San Francisco or head east to Colorado. The choice is yours. My phone buzzed with a text message from my supervisor. Conference starts at 10 a.m. sharp. Don't disappoint us, Rodriguez. Sarah, I can't just not show up. My job, my career, my responsibilities. We'll all be waiting for you when you get back. But right now, at this moment, you have something most people never get. A chance to choose a different destination. The runway at Sacramento grew larger through the windscreen. White stripes on black asphalt pointing toward a future I'd never questioned until 30,000 feet gave me the perspective to see it clearly. What would you do? I asked. Me? I'd ask myself one question. If I land in Sacramento and give that presentation, will I wake up tomorrow morning excited about the Fido Husti day ahead, or will I just be grateful that I survived another day of someone else's life? The radio crackled with approach control instructions, but Sarah's hand hovered over the radio without acknowledging them. She was waiting for my answer, and we both knew that whatever I said next would determine more than just our flight plan. Fasten your seatbelt, she said quietly. Whatever we decide, it's going to be a different kind of landing than either of us expected. The radio crackled again, more insistent this time. Citation 779 Delta Mike, Sacramento approach, please respond. Sarah's finger hesitated over the transmit button. In that moment of silence, suspended between earth and sky, I felt something shift inside my chest like a door I hadn't even known was locked suddenly swinging open. I need more time to think, I heard myself say. Sarah's smile was barely visible in the instrument panel's reflection, but I caught it. Sacramento approach, citation 779 Delta Mike. Requesting delay vectors for company traffic coordination. Citation 779 Delta Mike, roger, turn left heading 270. Maintain 6,000, expect further clearance in 10 minutes. The airplane banked gently to the west, away from the runway that had seemed so inevitable just moments before. Below us, the Sacramento River wound through the valley like a silver ribbon, and I watched my scheduled landing fade into the distance. Company traffic coordination? I asked. Pilots speak for, I need to buy some time while my passenger figures out her life. Sarah adjusted the throttles slightly. Works every time. Controllers assume we're dealing with corporate scheduling. Drama. My phone buzzed again. Another text from my supervisor. Boardroom prepped. Marketing materials printed. Break a leg out there. The irony wasn't lost on me. Break a leg. Maybe that's exactly what I needed to do, break something that had been carrying me in the wrong direction for so long. I'd forgotten how to walk. Tell me about teaching, Sarah said, her voice cutting through my spiraling thoughts. What grade did you want to work with? 3rd grade. The answer came without hesitation. That perfect age when they're old enough to have real conversations, but young enough to still believe in magic. When you can teach them about photosynthesis by growing beans in paper cups, or explain fractions with pizza parties. Sounds like you gave it serious thought. I had it all planned out. Student teaching at Roosevelt Elementary in Tempe, master's degree in education, maybe specializing in reading comprehension for kids who struggled with traditional methods. I paused, watching a small town pass beneath us, complete with a school playground where tiny figures ran around like ants. I even picked out the decorations for my classroom. Dr. Seuss theme, with a reading corner full of bean bags and a fish. Tank by the windows. What happened to change your mind? The question felt like an archaeologist's brush, carefully uncovering layers of decisions I'd buried under years of rationalization. My parents sat me down during spring break of my senior year. They'd done the math teacher salary versus student loan payments, health insurance costs, retirement savings. The numbers didn't add up to what they called financial security. Sarah banked the aircraft slightly, giving us a better view of the valley below. And you believe them? They weren't wrong. Teachers don't get rich. But somewhere between listening to their logic and accepting that job offer from Bristol Chun, I forgot to ask myself if being rich was the same thing as being happy. Are you happy? The question should have been simple. Instead, it felt like being asked to describe the color of water or the weight of silence. I thought about my morning routine, Alarm at 5:45. Protein shake while checking emails, 40-minute commute, listening to market analysis podcasts. 8 hours in meetings discussing profit margins and competitive positioning. Evening phone calls with clients who saw medications as investment opportunities rather than lifelines. I'm successful, I said finally. There's a difference. Good. Distinction. I learned that one the hard way too. What do you mean? Sarah's hands adjusted the controls with unconscious precision, but her eyes grew distant. First 15 years of my career, I flew for commercial airlines. Major carrier, steady schedule, excellent benefits package. Captain 737s on routes. Between Phoenix and Chicago, Phoenix and Denver, Phoenix and Seattle. Same airports, same flight attendants, same safety announcements 5 times a week. Sounds stable. Stable as a prison sentence. I knew every approach chart by heart, could land in any weather condition, had enough seniority to bid the best schedules. On paper, I was living the pilot dream. But I was dying inside, one routine flight at a time. The passengers were. Cargo to be transported efficiently. The destinations were just coordinates on a map. I'd forgotten why I'd wanted to fly in the first place. A small airport appeared off our left wing, a single runway carved into farmland with a few small aircraft tied down beside a simple terminal building. Sarah pointed it out with a slight tilt of her head. That's Woodland Davis Airport. Tiny place. Mostly used by crop dusters and flight training schools. I landed there for the first time about 6 years ago. Emergency fuel stop when headwinds ate up my reserves. Doesn't look like much. Exactly. But the woman who ran the fuel desk, Betty Martinez, made me the best cup of coffee I'd had in 20 years. We talked for an hour about flying, about the farms below us, about how the light changes when you're up here watching the world turn. For the first time in years, I remembered what it felt like to love what I do. The story hung between us like the horizon line, clear and definitive. I found myself leaning forward, caught up in something I hadn't expected to find at 6,000 feet. That's when you left the airlines? Not right away. Change is scary when you've built your entire identity around security. I spent 6 months researching charter companies, calculating insurance costs, studying business plans. My bank account said stay put. My marriage counselor said major career changes during difficult times were inadvisable. You were married? 16 years. David was a good man, stable job in pharmaceutical sales. She caught herself and glanced back at me with a rueful smile. No offense to your industry. None taken. What happened? We wanted different things from life, and it took us both too long to admit it. He needed predictability, routine, 5-year plans. I needed to feel like each day mattered, like I was going somewhere that mattered to me, instead of just somewhere the schedule demanded. The afternoon sun was beginning to slant through the cabin windows, casting everything in golden light that made the valley below look like a Renaissance painting. I thought about my own relationship history, a series of men who'd appreciated my career stability, but never quite understood why. I worked such long hours for goals that didn't particularly inspire me. Do you regret leaving? The airlines? Never. The marriage? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. I regret that we couldn't find a way to grow in the same direction. But staying would have meant becoming someone I didn't recognize in the mirror. My phone buzzed with a call this time. My supervisor's name flashed on the screen, accompanied by a photo from last year's company Christmas party. Both of us wearing forced smiles and holding champagne flutes filled with sparkling cider. I declined the call. That felt significant, Sarah observed. First time I've ever ignored a call from Margaret Chun. The Margaret Chun? As in Bristol Chun Pharmaceuticals? Her grandfather founded the company. She's been grooming me as her eventual replacement. Which is partly why this presentation matters so much. It's not just about the arthritis medication. It's about proving I can handle the ethical complexities of pharmaceutical marketing. Ethical complexities. Sarah repeated the phrase with the tone of someone testing the weight of unfamiliar words. What does that look like in practice? The question felt like a scalpel, precise and unavoidable. I'd spent years learning to discuss ethical complexities in boardrooms, using language that acknowledged problems without admitting fault, that expressed concern without accepting responsibility. We help people, I said, hearing the rehearsed quality in my own voice. Medical. Breakthroughs that improve quality of life, extend lifespans, reduce suffering. And the price points? Research and development costs are enormous. FDA approval processes can take decades. Patent protections ensure companies can recoup investments and fund future innovations. Sarah nodded slowly. Sounds like you've given that speech before. It's not a speech. It's the reality of pharmaceutical economics. Is it? Or is it a story we tell ourselves to make peace with charging your mother $400 a month for pain relief? The words hit like sudden turbulence, jarring and inescapable. I thought about the clinical trials I'd analyzed, the focus groups I'd observed through one-way glass, the market research that reduced human suffering to demographic data points and revenue projections. That's not fair, I said, but even as I spoke, I knew the defensiveness in my voice betrayed uncertainty. My mother worked as a seamstress for 43 years, Sarah continued, her voice level but intense. Bent over sewing machines in factories that barely met safety standards, saving every penny for a retirement that was supposed to include travel and grandchildren and Sunday dinners without worrying about prescription copays. I understand that healthcare costs are a burden. She showed me her medication last month. Tiny white pills in a bottle that costs more per ounce than gold. The pharmacy tech, who knows her by name after 5 years of monthly visits, always asks if she wants to wait to pick it up until her Social Security check clears. The cabin felt smaller suddenly, as if the walls were closing in. I stared out the window at the sprawling agricultural landscape below neat rows of crops that would feed families, orchards that would produce fruit for kitchen tables, simple and honest work that connected directly to human need. What do you want me to say? I asked finally. I want you to tell me what you told yourself the first time you realized that marketing medications might mean choosing between profit and patience. The memory came back with startling clarity. My second week at Bristol Chun, sitting in on a pricing strategy meeting for a diabetes medication. The discussion had centered around maximizing market penetration while optimizing revenue streams, with occasional references to patient access programs that sounded generous until you read the fine print about income eligibility. I'd raised my hand, fresh out of business school and naive enough to ask direct questions. What about patients who can't afford the list price, but make too much to qualify for assistance programs? The room had gone quiet. Margaret Chun had smiled the kind of smile that acknowledged the question while dismissing its relevance. Emma, our responsibility is to our shareholders and our research pipeline. We trust that market forces and insurance negotiations will ensure appropriate access. I hadn't asked that kind of question again. I told myself that someone else would solve the access problem, I said quietly. Insurance companies, government programs, patient advocacy groups. I convinced myself that my job was to focus on the marketing side and trust others to handle the ethical implications. And now? Now I'm not sure those problems are someone else's responsibility. The Sacramento approach contacted us again, requesting our intentions. Sarah looked back at me, eyebrows raised in question. Where to, Emma? I looked down at my phone, where 17 unread messages waited. Conference agenda, presentation materials, hotel confirmation numbers, all the infrastructure of a life I'd built around other people's expectations. Is that offer to fly somewhere else still open? Absolutely. Where did you have in mind? I thought about Betty Martinez at Woodland Davis Airport, making perfect coffee and talking about light changing. When you're watching the world turn. I thought about classrooms full of third graders discovering that learning could be an adventure. I thought about my mother's dream of grandchildren she could afford to spoil. Somewhere I can think clearly, I said. Somewhere that doesn't come with pre-written speeches about ethical complexities. Sarah's grin was visible now, wide and genuine. I know just the place. Sacramento approach. Citation 779 Delta Mike, requesting diversion to Half Moon Bay Airport for passenger medical consultation. I shot Sarah a look, but she held up one finger while the controller responded. Citation 779 Delta Mike, Roger, approved as requested. Contact NorCal approach on 1-2-0-point-5-5 for vectors to Half Moon Bay. Medical consultation? I whispered. Sarah's eyes twinkled with mischief as she changed radio frequencies. Sometimes you need to check your vital signs before making life-altering decisions. Perfectly legitimate medical reason. The aircraft banked westward, and suddenly we were flying toward the Pacific Ocean instead of an inland conference room. Through the windows, the landscape transformed from agricultural flatlands to rolling hills covered in coastal fog that looked like cotton batting stretched between mountains. Half Moon Bay, Sarah explained, is where I learned that airports don't have to be sterile places designed for maximum efficiency. It's got soul. My phone had been buzzing constantly for the past 20 minutes. Margaret Chun had escalated from texts to calls to emails marked urgent. I finally switched it to airplane mode, and the sudden silence felt like taking off a too tight shoe. Tell me about this place we're going, I said, settling back into my seat for the first time since takeoff. Coastal Airport, about 25 miles south of San Francisco. Single runway, surrounded by pumpkin farms and artichoke fields. On clear days, you can see the Farallon Islands from the pattern. On foggy days, which is most days, you feel like you're landing on a cloud. And this helps with life decisions. How? You'll see. The coastline appeared ahead of us, a dramatic meeting of land and ocean where waves crashed against cliffs in explosions of white foam. Sarah began her descent, and I watched the altimeter unwind as we dropped towards sea level. Emma, can I ask you something personal? Shoot. When was the last time you did something just because it made you happy? Not because it advanced your career or impressed someone else or checked off a box on your life plan. Just pure, uncomplicated happiness. The question hung in the air like the marine layer we were descending through. I searched my memory, scrolling back through months of networking events, performance reviews, strategic planning sessions, and weekend emails. I honestly can't remember, I admitted. That's what I thought. Same thing happened to me during my airline years. I was so focused on building seniority and maintaining my schedule that I forgot why I'd wanted to fly in the first place. Half Moon Bay Airport materialized out of the fog like something from a dream. A single runway stretched between fields of orange pumpkins with a small terminal building that looked more like a farmhouse than an aviation facility. Sarah lined up for the final approach with the easy confidence of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. The first time I landed here, she said, working the controls as we descended, I was deadheading back to Phoenix after dropping off a passenger in San Francisco. Fog had rolled in, and I needed somewhere to wait it out. Changed my life. We touched down smoothly on the narrow runway, and Sarah taxied toward a collection of hangars that looked like they'd been built by someone who cared more about character than efficiency. As she shut down the engines, the silence that followed felt different from the sterile quiet of commercial airports, warmer, somehow, and full of possibility. Welcome to my second favorite place on Earth, Sarah said, opening the cabin door. Air that rushed in carried the scent of ocean salt, aviation fuel, and something else, pumpkin spice. I realized from the surrounding farms that stretched to the horizon in neat orange rows. A man in his 60s approached our aircraft, wearing coveralls and a smile that looked like it had been permanently installed. His white beard was neatly trimmed, and his eyes held the kind of sparkle that suggested he found genuine joy in his work. "Sarah Mitchell," he called out. "Thought that was your bird. What brings you to our little slice of paradise?" "Hey, Frank. This is Emma Rodriguez. Emma, meet Frank Castellanos, airport manager, philosopher, and maker of the best fish tacos between here and Monterey." Frank extended a hand that felt like weathered leather, but warm as a handshake could be. "Any friend of Sarah's is welcome here. You folks staying long enough for lunch?" I looked at Sarah, who shrugged. "That depends on Emma's appetite for adventure. I should probably call my office," I said, pulling out my phone. "No signal out here," Frank said cheerfully. "Cell towers on the other side of the mountains, and the fog blocks what little comes through. One of the things I love about this place forces you to be present. The idea of being unreachable should have terrified me. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, relief. "Come on," Sarah said. "Let me show you around. Frank, mind if we borrow the golf cart? Keys are in it. Bring it back with more gas than you started with, and we'll call it even." The golf cart was older than some of the aircraft on the ramp, but it puttered along faithfully as Sarah gave me the grand tour. We drove past a row of vintage aircraft that looked like they belonged in a museum. A restored 1940s Stearman biplane, a sleek 1960s Mooney, a helicopter that Frank apparently used for aerial pumpkin farming surveys. "This place is like stepping back in time," I said. "That's the point. No rushing, no corporate pressure, no quarterly earnings reports. Just aviation the way it was meant to be, about the joy of flight, not the efficiency of transport." We parked near a weathered picnic table overlooking the runway, where Frank had set up what he called his office, a folding chair, a thermos of coffee, and a logbook where he tracked every aircraft movement by hand. "Frank's been here for 37 years, Sarah explained as we sat down. "Bought the place when it was headed for development into a shopping mall. Mortgaged everything he owned to preserve it as an airport. That must have been risky. Terrifying," Frank said, appearing with 3 steaming mugs of coffee that smelled like heaven. "My wife thought I'd lost my mind. Friends said I was throwing away a secure retirement. But some things are worth the risk." I wrapped my hands around the warm mug and inhaled the rich aroma. "Do you ever regret it?" Frank's laugh was as warm as his coffee. "Every morning when I wake up here, I thank whatever forces conspired to make me brave enough to bet on something I believed in instead of something that looked safe on paper." A small aircraft appeared in the distance, a yellow Piper Cub that looked like a flying banana against the gray sky. Frank excused himself to coordinate the landing, speaking into a handheld radio with the casual efficiency of someone who'd done this dance thousands of times. "Sarah," I said, watching the Cub touch down with barely a whisper, "what you said earlier about your mother and the medication costs. Forget I mentioned it. I didn't mean to make you feel guilty about your job." "No, that's not what I'm asking. I want to know what happened to her." Sarah was quiet for a moment, watching the Cub taxi toward the parking area. "She went without her medication for 3 months last winter. Told me her arthritis was feeling better, that she didn't need the pills anymore. I believed her until I stopped by unannounced and found her crying at the kitchen table because she couldn't open a jar of pickles. The image hit me like a physical blow. One thought about all the market research I'd conducted, all the demographic data I'd analyzed, and realized I'd never once pictured an actual person sitting at an actual kitchen table, choosing between pain, relief, and groceries. What did you do? Started paying for her prescriptions myself. $400 a month comes out of my aircraft maintenance fund now, which means I fly older equipment and do more of my own repairs, but it's worth it to see her making bread again. Does she know? I told her the pharmacy started a new insurance program for seniors. White lie that lets her keep her dignity while keeping her out of pain. The Piper Cub's pilot climbed out and waved in our direction. A woman about my age wearing jeans and a leather jacket that had seen better decades. She walked over with the kind of easy confidence that comes from doing exactly what you love. For a living. Sarah, I was hoping I'd run into you out here. The woman's smile was infectious. I'm Karen Washington, by the way, she said to me. I run scenic flights out of Palo Alto, but Frank's Runway is my favorite place to practice short field landings. Emma Rodriguez. I'm having something of a career crisis at 30,000 feet. Karen laughed. Those are the best kind. Mind if I join you? Frank makes coffee that could resurrect the dead. As Karen settled in with her own mug, I found myself studying her face. She had the kind of tan that comes from spending time outdoors, laugh lines that suggested she smiled more. Then she frowned, and an easy way of moving that spoke of someone comfortable in her own skin. Karen used to be a software engineer, Sarah explained. Silicon Valley, 6-figure salary, stock options that would have made her rich if she'd stayed long enough. What happened? I asked. I realized I was writing code to help people buy things they didn't need with money they didn't have, while spending my weekends dreaming about flying. Karen shrugged. Classic quarter-life crisis at 35. How did you make the transition? Badly at first. Quit my job without a real plan. Burned through my savings learning to fly commercially. Slept on friends' couches while building flight hours. My parents were convinced I'd lost my mind. Had you? Probably. But it was the good kind of crazy, the kind that happens when you stop living someone else's definition of success and start chasing your own. Frank returned from coordinating the Cubs parking, and soon we were deep in conversation about aviation, life choices, and the courage required to change course when you're already halfway to the wrong destination. The thing about flying, Frank said, refilling our coffee mugs from his seemingly endless thermos, is that you can't fake it. Either you're going where you want to go, or you're not. There's no middle ground at altitude. What do you mean? I asked. Well, you can tell yourself you're headed to Sacramento for important business meetings, but if your heart's pulling you toward Half Moon Bay, the airplane knows the truth. Eventually, you have to choose between your flight plan and your actual destination. The metaphor wasn't subtle, but it was effective. I thought about my carefully planned career trajectory, 5-year goals, performance benchmarks, networking strategies designed to position me for Margaret Chune's eventual succession. All of it pointing toward a corner office I wasn't sure I actually wanted. What if you've never figured out what your actual destination is? I asked. Then you start with what you know you don't want, Karen suggested. Process of elimination. That's how I figured out I didn't want to spend my life debugging software for e-commerce platforms. For me, Sarah added, it was realizing I didn't want to spend another day flying routes that felt like glorified bus service. And for me, Frank concluded, it was understanding that I didn't want to watch this place get bulldozed for another strip mall while I sat safely in some corporate job that paid well but meant nothing. The fog was beginning to lift, revealing glimpses of the Pacific Ocean beyond the pumpkin fields. In the distance, I could see the outline of what Sarah had called the Farallon Islands, mysterious shapes rising from the water like ancient secrets waiting to be discovered. Emma, Sarah said quietly, what do you know you don't want? The answer came without hesitation, surprising me with its clarity. I don't want to spend tomorrow morning in a conference room explaining why $400 medications are good for people who can't afford $400 medications. The words hung in the coastal air like a declaration of independence. For the first time since takeoff, I felt like I could breathe properly. Frank raised his coffee mug in toast to knowing what you don't want. Sometimes that's the first step toward figuring out what you do. We clinked mugs, and I realized something had shifted during our conversation. The tight feeling in my chest, The one I'd carried for so long I'd forgotten it wasn't normal had begun to loosen. "So what's next?" Karen asked. "Back to Sacramento for the conference." I looked at Sarah, then at Frank, then at Karen's expectant face. 3 people who'd bet on themselves and won, sitting at a picnic table beside a runway where dreams still took flight. "I honestly don't know," I said. "But for the first time in years, that doesn't terrify me." Sarah's smile could have powered the entire airport. "Now you're talking like a pilot." The satellite phone in Frank's office started ringing just as we finished our second round of coffee. He disappeared into the small building, emerging a few minutes later with an expression that mixed concern and amusement. "Emma," he called out, "you might want to take this call. Sounds urgent." I followed him inside, where the phone sat on a desk that looked like it had been built from aircraft parts, aluminum legs, riveted joints, and a surface that gleamed like polished wing metal. Frank handed me the receiver and tactfully stepped outside. "Emma Rodriguez speaking. Thank God." Margaret Chun's voice crackled through the connection, sharp with barely controlled frustration. "Where the hell are you? The conference started an hour ago, and I've got a room full of investors asking why my marketing director is a no-show." I glanced through the window at Sarah, Karen, and Frank, who were now examining the engine compartment of the yellow Piper Cub. Their easy camaraderie felt like a different world from the one pressing through the phone line. "I'm dealing with a transportation issue," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "What kind of transportation issue?" "Your pilot called in a medical emergency, but when I contacted Sacramento General, they had no record of any incoming patient named Rodriguez." My heart skipped. Sarah had been more creative with her excuses than I'd realized. "It's complicated, Margaret." "Uncomplicated. Fast. I've got board members flying in from New York specifically to hear your presentation on the arthritis medication. This deal represents $40 million in potential revenue, Emma. $40 million. Through the window, I watched Karen showing Frank and Sarah something under the Piper's cowling. Their faces were animated with the kind of enthusiasm I couldn't remember. Feeling about quarterly projections or market penetration analyses. What if I told you I was having serious concerns about the pricing structure? I heard myself say. The silence on the other end stretched long enough for me to wonder if the connection had failed. Concerns? Margaret's voice had dropped to the tone she reserved for subordinates who'd overstepped their bounds. "What kind of concerns?" "Ethical ones. $400 a month for a medication that costs less than $50 to manufacture. Patients choosing between rent and pain relief. The disconnect between our mission statement about improving lives and our actual impact on stop." The word cracked through the phone like a whip. "Stop right there. Emma, I'm going to assume that whatever medical emergency you're dealing with has affected your judgment. Take the afternoon to get your head straight and be in that conference room tomorrow morning at 8 sharp with your presentation ready and your concerns checked at the door." "And if I'm not?" Another long silence, followed by a laugh that held no warmth whatsoever. "Then you can update your LinkedIn profile from whatever transportation hub you're stranded in. There are 100 marketing directors in Phoenix who would kill for your position, and none of them would waste my time with philosophical hand-wringing about drug pricing." The line went dead. I sat staring at the phone for several minutes, processing what had just happened. In less than 6 hours, I'd gone from rising star to potential unemployment statistic. The smart thing would be to call Sarah back inside, ask her to file a flight plan for Sacramento, and show up tomorrow morning with my presentation and my reservations both professionally packaged. Instead, I walked outside and found the 3 of them deep in conversation about the Piper's engine modification. "Everything okay?" Sarah asked, reading my expression with the pilot's intuition for trouble. "Define okay." I summarized the phone call, watching their faces shift from concern to something approaching admiration. $40 million in revenue, Frank whistled low. "That's serious money." Serious enough to fire me over, apparently. Karen laughed, but not unkindly. Welcome to the club. Nothing quite like burning bridges with spectacular thoroughness. How do you feel? I took inventory of my emotional state, expecting to find panic or regret. Instead, I discovered something unexpected, relief mixed with a strange kind of exhilaration. Terrified, I admitted. But also free. That's the feeling, Sarah said, nodding approval. Terror and freedom in equal measure. Sign of a good decision in progress. Good decision? I stared at her. I just talked myself out of a six-figure job over a philosophical disagreement about drug pricing. No, Frank corrected gently. You just discovered that your principles are worth more than your salary. Took me 43 years to learn that. Lesson. A white SUV appeared in the distance, kicking up dust as it navigated the unpaved road leading to the airport. As it drew closer, I could make out the Bristol Chen logo on the door. Expecting company? Karen asked. Not me, I said, but my stomach was already dropping toward my shoes. The SUV pulled up beside the terminal building, and two people climbed out. I recognized them immediately. James Morrison, Bristol Chen's head of security, and Dr. Patricia Webb, the company's chief medical officer. Both wore expressions that suggested this wasn't a social visit. Ms. Rodriguez, James called out, approaching with the measured pace of someone accustomed to diffusing situations. Miss Chen asked us to check on your welfare. My welfare is fine. Thank you. Dr. Webb stepped forward, her smile professionally concerned. Emma, Margaret mentioned you were experiencing some kind of medical episode. We brought a physician's kit and authorization for emergency medical transport if needed. I glanced at Sarah, who was watching the interaction with the focused attention of someone calculating vectors and fuel loads. Frank had quietly positioned himself between the newcomers and his airport office. Karen looked like she was trying not to laugh. There's no medical emergency, I said. I'm just taking some time to think. About what? Dr. Webb's voice carried the kind of gentle firmness doctors use with confused patients. Emma, you've been under tremendous pressure lately. The presentation, the promotion track, the responsibility of representing the company at such a high level. Sometimes stress manifests in ways that can cloud our judgment. My judgment is perfectly clear. James Morrison stepped closer, his voice dropping to the tone security professionals use when they want to seem helpful rather than threatening. Ms. Rodriguez, I think there may be some confusion about the situation. Ms. Chen has expressed concerns about potential outside influences affecting your decision-making process. He looked pointedly at Sarah, Frank, and Karen. Outside influences? Sarah's voice could have cut glass. You mean friends who actually listen when someone questions whether their career path aligns with their values? Ma'am, I'm not sure who. You are, but this is a company matter. I'm the pilot of this aircraft. Sarah interrupted. And this is my decision where we land and when we leave. Company matter or not, Dr. Webb tried a different approach. Emma, why don't you come with us back to Sacramento? We can postpone the presentation until you're feeling more yourself. No pressure, no deadlines, just time to recover from whatever's been troubling you. The offer was reasonable, professionally presented, and completely missing the point. They were treating my moral awakening like a fever that needed to break. What if this is myself? I asked, what if the person who spent 6 hours in a boardroom this morning without questioning whether her work was actually helping people? What if that was the confused version? James Morrison's professional facade slipped slightly. Ms. Rodriguez, with respect, you're making career-ending decisions based on a few hours of conversation with strangers at a small airport. That doesn't sound like the rational, analytical person Ms. Chen described to us. Maybe rational and ethical aren't the same thing. Dr. Webb opened her medical bag with the kind of deliberate motion designed to command attention. Emma, I'd like to check your blood pressure and do a basic neurological assessment. Stress can cause temporary alterations in judgment that feel very real but aren't necessarily. No. The word came out sharper than I'd intended. I'm not having a medical emergency. I'm not under outside influence, and I'm not confused about what I'm doing. Then what are you doing? James Morrison asked bluntly. I looked around at the small airport, the weathered picnic table where we'd shared coffee and stories, the yellow Piper Cub that represented Karen's successful escape from corporate life, the runway where Frank had bet everything on preserving something he believed in. Then I looked at the white SUV with its corporate logo, the two professionals who'd driven 3 hours to retrieve a wayward employee, the medical bag full of instruments designed to diagnose problems that couldn't be fixed with pills or procedures. I'm learning the difference between what I've been told I want and what I actually want, I said finally. Dr. Webb snapped her bag shut with obvious frustration. Emma, you're throwing away a brilliant career over philosophical concerns that won't pay your rent or build your retirement fund. She's also refusing to participate in a system that forces elderly women to choose between medication and meals, Sarah said quietly. James Morrison's attention sharpened. Ma'am, are you suggesting that Bristol Chun Pharmaceuticals engages in unethical pricing practices? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating a fact that anyone with elderly relatives and expensive prescriptions can verify. The tension ratcheted up another notch. I could see Morrison calculating whether this conversation constituted some kind of corporate security threat, while Dr. Webb appeared to be reconsidering her medical emergency theory. Ms. Rodriguez, Morrison said carefully, I think it would be best for everyone if you returned with us to Sacramento for a proper discussion of these concerns through appropriate company channels. And if I choose not to? Then you'll be making that choice without the protection of company employment, company benefits, or company legal representation. The threat hung in the coastal air like fog present, chilling and impossible to ignore. I thought about my apartment lease, my car payments, my student loans that still had 7 years left on the repayment schedule. The practical weight of adult financial obligations pressed down like atmospheric pressure at altitude. But then I looked at Frank, who'd mortgaged everything to save an airport from becoming a shopping mall. At Karen, who'd slept on friends' couches while building flight hours toward a dream job. At Sarah, who'd walked away from airline security to fly passengers who needed more than transportation from point A to point B. I understand the consequences, I said. Dr. Webb made one final attempt. Emma, your parents are listed as your emergency contacts. Would you like us to call them? Sometimes family perspective can help clarify difficult decisions. The mention of my parents sent a cold shock through my system. I could picture exactly how that conversation would go: the disappointment, the lectures about financial security, the inevitable comparisons to cousins who'd made more sensible career choices. My parents don't get a vote in this decision. James. Morrison pulled out his phone. Ms. Chun will need to know your final answer. Are you returning with us for tomorrow's presentation, or should I tell her to proceed with alternative arrangements? I looked at Sarah, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Whatever I decided, she was ready to fly wherever courage demanded. Tell her to proceed with alternative arrangements. Morrison spoke quietly into his phone while Dr. Webb packed up her medical kit with movements sharp enough to cut glass. Within minutes, they were back in their SUV, leaving tire tracks in the dust and a wake of corporate disapproval that hung in the air long after they'd disappeared down the road. Well, Frank said into the silence that followed, that was dramatic. Think I just burned the biggest bridge of my career, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Karen grinned. Welcome to the other side. The view's better from here. Sarah was already walking toward our aircraft. Come on, Emma. Let's go find out what life looks like when you're flying towards something instead of away from it. As we climbed back into the citation, I realized that for the first time in years, I had absolutely no idea what tomorrow would bring. The uncertainty should have terrified me. Instead, it felt like the beginning of everything I'd been too afraid to want. The Citation's engines hummed to life as Sarah completed her pre-flight checks for the second time that day. Through the windscreen, I watched Frank wave from his folding chair beside the runway, while Karen performed her own pre-flight inspection on the yellow Piper Cub. The normalcy of their routine felt surreal after the corporate intervention we just survived. "Where to now?" Sarah asked, her hands moving across the instrument panel with practiced efficiency. "I honestly don't know." The admission should have felt devastating. Instead, it carried an odd sense of liberation, like stepping off a moving walkway and discovering I could walk just fine on my own. That's okay. Sometimes the best destinations are the ones you discover along the way. Sarah contacted ground control for taxi clearance, then looked back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Emma, there's something I need to tell you before we take off." My stomach tightened. "What kind of something?" "The kind that might change how you feel about this whole adventure." She paused the taxi sequence and turned in her seat to face me fully. I wasn't entirely honest about why I took this charter today. "What do you mean?" Sarah reached into her flight bag and pulled out a manila folder thick with papers. "Margaret Chun didn't just book a pilot for your trip to Sacramento. She specifically requested me." The world seemed to tilt slightly, like hitting unexpected turbulence in clear air. "Why would she do that?" "Because 3 months ago, I flew her to a medical conference in Denver. We got to talking during the flight, and I mentioned my mother's struggles with prescription costs. Mentioned her arthritis medication specifically. The same medication I was supposed to present today. The same one." Sarah's voice carried a weight I hadn't heard before. "Margaret asked a lot of questions about my mother's situation. Insurance coverage, out-of-pocket costs, how the pricing affected her quality of life. I thought she was just being conversational. But she wasn't. Yesterday morning, she called personally to request that I pilot your flight. Said she wanted to ensure you had an experienced captain for such an important trip. But now I'm wondering if she had a different agenda." The implications hit me like a slipstream. "You think she wanted you to tell me about your mother?" "I think Margaret Chun is a lot more aware of the ethical implications of her company's pricing than she lets on in board meetings. And I think she wanted to see how you'd react when faced with the human cost of the decisions you're paid to defend." I stared out the window at the pumpkin field stretching toward the ocean, trying to process this revelation. So this whole day, the questions about my career, the stories about your mother, the trip to Half Moon Bay. Was any of it real? Sarah's laugh was rueful but genuine. "Emma, I can't fake the way my mother looked when she couldn't open that pickle jar. I can't manufacture the relief I felt when you questioned whether charging $400 for pain relief was ethical. And I definitely can't simulate the pride I felt when you chose your principles over your paycheck. But Margaret orchestrated the whole thing. She created the opportunity. What we did with it was entirely up to us." The radio crackled with clearance for takeoff, but Sarah didn't acknowledge it yet. Instead, she studied my face with the intense focus of someone reading weather patterns in an uncertain sky. "How do you feel about that?" she asked. I took inventory of my emotions, expecting to find anger or betrayal. Instead, I discovered something more complex, a mixture of admiration for Margaret's psychological sophistication and frustration at being manipulated, combined with gratitude for the outcome, regardless of its orchestration. "I feel like I've been played," I said slowly, "but I also feel like I'm exactly where I need to be." "Good answer." Sarah keyed the radio. "Half Moon Bay Tower, Citation 779 Delta Mike, ready for departure." Citation 779 Delta Mike. Half Moon Bay Tower, cleared for takeoff runway 12. Fly heading 0-9-0. Contact NorCal departure on 1-2-4-.8. We accelerated down the runway and lifted into the late afternoon sky, climbing through scattered clouds toward the clear air above. As Half Moon Bay fell away beneath us, I watched Frank's airport shrink to a small patch of civilization carved from the coastal wilderness. Sarah, can I ask you something? Anything. If Margaret wanted me to question the company's ethics, why did she send security to drag me back? Because creating the test and passing it are two different things. She gave you the opportunity to examine your conscience, but she also gave you every chance to choose the safe path. And now she knows exactly who you are. The question is, do you? The aircraft leveled off at 8,000 feet, and Sarah engaged the autopilot. Below us, the California coast stretched northward in an endless procession of cliffs, beaches, and small coastal towns that looked like toys from our altitude. I know I don't want to spend my life marketing medications to people who can't afford them, I said. Beyond that, I'm still figuring it out. That's a start. What does your gut tell you about what comes next? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. The number was local to Phoenix, but I didn't recognize it. Emma Rodriguez. Ms. Rodriguez? This is David Chun, Margaret's son. I'm calling from Phoenix Children's Hospital. My blood chilled. Is Margaret okay? She's fine. I'm calling about something else entirely. My mother asked me to reach out if certain circumstances develop today. What kind of circumstances? The kind where you might suddenly find yourself with some unexpected free time and a newly developed interest in healthcare ethics. I shot a look at Sarah, who was pretending to study her navigation charts while obviously listening to every word. Dr. Chun, I'm not sure I understand. I run a nonprofit program that provides free medical care to underserved communities throughout Arizona and New Mexico. We operate mobile clinics, staff volunteer physicians, and yes, we help patients access medications they can't afford through traditional channels. That sounds like important work. It is. It's also severely underfunded and in desperate need of someone with pharmaceutical industry experience who understands both marketing and ethics. Someone who could help us navigate the bureaucracy of drug companies while advocating for patients who can't advocate for themselves. The offer hung in the air like a crosswind, unexpected, potentially dangerous, but impossible to ignore. Dr. Chun, are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a chance to use your skills in service of something you might actually believe in. The salary is roughly 1/3 of what Bristol Chun was paying you, but the work actually helps people sleep better at night instead of keeping them awake wondering if they're part of the problem. How did you know I was interested in this kind of work? My mother has excellent instincts about people. She suspected you were ready for a change before you did. I looked down at the landscape, below agricultural fields giving way to suburbs. Highways carrying thousands of people toward destinations they might or might not have chosen for themselves. Can I think about it? Of course, but Emma, don't think too long. The mobile clinic program is launching a new initiative next month, and we need someone who can hit the ground running. What kind of initiative? Partnership with tribal communities. In rural Arizona, places where the nearest pharmacy is 200 miles away, and the average income wouldn't cover a week's worth of arthritis medication. People who need advocates with pharmaceutical industry experience and genuine commitment to ethical healthcare. The description hit me like recognition. This was what my marketing skills could be used for. Not to convince people to buy products they couldn't afford, but to help them access care they desperately needed. Dr. Chun, can I call you back tomorrow? Looking forward to it. The line went dead, and I sat staring at my phone while Sarah maintained our northward heading along the coast. Interesting timing, she observed. You think Margaret planned that too? I think Margaret Chun is playing chess while the rest of us are playing checkers. The question is whether you want to be her pawn or her partner. What's the difference? A pawn gets moved around the board by someone else's strategy. A partner chooses her own moves. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reflected off the ocean below. In the distance, I could see the lights of San Francisco beginning to twinkle as the city prepared for evening. Sarah, where are we actually going? That depends. Are you ready to make a choice that's entirely your own? I thought I already did that when I refused to go back to Sacramento. That was choosing what you didn't want. This is different. This is choosing what you do want, knowing it won't be easy and it won't make you rich and it definitely won't impress your parents. My phone buzzed with a text message from my mother. Dad and I just heard from Margaret Chun. Please call immediately. We're worried sick. I stared at the message, imagining the conversation that would follow any call I made. The disappointment, the practical concerns, the inevitable suggestion that I was throwing away everything they'd worked to provide for me. My parents are going to lose their minds, I said. Probably. Does that change what you know is right? No. Then, that's your answer. I turned off my phone and slipped it into my purse. For the first time since takeoff, the cabin felt completely quiet, no buzzing devices, no corporate demands, no external voices telling me what I should want from life. I want to help Dr. Chun's mobile clinic program, I said, the words feeling solid and real in a way that quarterly projections never had. I want to use my pharmaceutical experience to help people access medications instead of selling them products they can't afford. Even though it means giving up financial security, even though it means discovering what security actually feels like when it's not built on other people's suffering. Sarah's smile was visible in the reflection of the windscreen. Now you're talking like someone who knows where she's going. Where are we going, by the way? Somewhere you can call Dr. Chun back without corporate security teams tracking you down. Sarah adjusted our heading slightly eastward. I know a place in the Sierra Nevada mountains. Small airport, even smaller town. Perfect for making big life decisions without interference. And after that? After that, you start building the life you actually want instead of the one you thought you were supposed to want. The lights of civilization began to fade below us as we headed inland toward the mountains. Ahead lay uncertainty, financial challenges, and conversations with parents who wouldn't understand why their daughter had chosen purpose over profit. Behind us lay the coastal fog rolling in over Half Moon Bay, where Frank would soon be securing aircraft against the evening winds and Karen would be planning tomorrow's scenic flights over landscapes that reminded people why they'd fallen in love with flying in the first place. And in the cockpit of a 37-year-old Citation, a marketing executive and a charter pilot flew toward a destination neither of them had planned when the day began, both finally heading in the direction their hearts had been pulling them all along. Sarah, yeah, thank you. For the questions, the stories, the detour, all of it. Thank you for having the courage to answer honestly. The autopilot held our heading steady as we climbed toward the Sierra Nevada peaks, where tomorrow would begin. With decisions made entirely on our own terms, the small mountain airport at Truckee Tahoe appeared below us just as the last light faded from the western sky. Nestled between snow-capped peaks at 6,000 feet elevation, it looked like something from a postcard, runway lights twinkling against the dark silhouettes of pine forests. A terminal building that could have been someone's mountain cabin. Welcome to my favorite thinking spot, Sarah said as we touched down on the narrow runway. High enough that cell service is spotty, remote enough that corporate security teams can't find you, and beautiful enough to remind you that there's a whole world beyond quarterly earnings reports. As we taxied toward the terminal, I could see a few other aircraft tied down for the night, a mix of personal planes and charter flights that had brought skiers and hikers to the mountains. The air that rushed into the cabin when Sarah opened the door was thin and crisp, carrying the scent of pine needles and wood smoke. There's a lodge about a quarter mile from here, Sarah explained as we secured the aircraft. Family-owned place, having run it for 3 generations. They don't ask questions about why city people show up unexpectedly needing a quiet place to think. The Pine Ridge Lodge looked exactly like what Central Casting would order for a mountain retreat log construction. Stone fireplace visible through. Large windows and a front porch where guests could sit in rocking chairs and contemplate life's bigger questions. The owner, a weathered man named Tom Bradley, greeted us like old friends despite having never seen me before. "Sarah always brings interesting passengers," he said, showing us to adjacent rooms with quilts on the beds and windows that framed the moonlit peaks. Breakfast starts at 6, coffee's available all night in the main room, and the phone in the lobby works when the mountain spirits are feeling cooperative. That evening, I sat in one of those rocking chairs while Sarah built a fire in the outdoor fire pit. The silence was profound, no traffic, no city noise, just the occasional whisper of wind through the pines and the distant call of an owl. "Ready to make that phone call?" Sarah asked, settling into the chair beside me. I pulled out David Chun's business card, studying it in the firelight. Phoenix Children's Hospital. Mobile Healthcare Initiative. Director of Community Outreach. Simple titles that represented something I'd never considered possible, using my pharmaceutical knowledge to help people instead of exploit them. What if I'm not qualified for this kind of work? What if you're more qualified than you think? You understand drug pricing, insurance bureaucracy, and how to navigate pharmaceutical companies. You've seen the system from the inside. That makes you exactly the kind of advocate these communities need. The phone call lasted 47 minutes. David Chun explained the mobile clinic program in detail, retrofitted buses that brought medical care to remote areas, partnerships with tribal health services, a medication assistance program that helped patients access treatments regardless of their ability to pay. The work was challenging, sometimes frustrating, always underfunded, but it made a difference in real people's lives. We need someone who can speak the pharmaceutical industry language when we're negotiating compassionate use programs, he said. Someone who understands the system well enough to work within it while advocating for patients who've been priced out of care. When would you need an answer? Tomorrow would be ideal. We're launching the new tribal partnership next week, and having someone with your background would make all the difference. After I hung up, Sarah and I sat by the fire until well past midnight, talking about courage, change, and the difference between jobs that pay well and work that pays off in ways money can't measure. I woke before dawn and found Sarah already in the lodge's kitchen, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink. "Sleep well?" she asked. "Better than I have in months, maybe years." I poured myself coffee from the pot that seemed to refill itself by mountain magic. I dreamed about teaching third graders how photosynthesis works. Good dream or anxiety dream? The best kind. The kind where you wake up excited about the day ahead instead of wondering how you'll survive it. At 7 o'clock I called David Chun back. "Dr. Chun, this is Emma Rodriguez. I'd like to accept your offer." "Outstanding. Can you start Monday?" "Monday works perfectly." The conversation that followed covered logistics, salary negotiation that felt more like planning a mission than discussing compensation. Training schedules that included everything from medical ethics to tribal cultural sensitivity. Travel requirements that would take me to communities I'd never heard of, but desperately needed advocacy. "Emma," David said before we hung up, "welcome to work that actually matters." The flight back to Phoenix took 2 hours, but it felt like traveling between different worlds. As we descended toward the desert landscape I'd called home for 6 years, I realized how much had changed in less than 24 hours. Same city, same airport, same apartment waiting for me, but I was returning as a completely different person. "Any regrets?" Sarah asked as we taxied toward the terminal. "About leaving Bristol, Chun? None. About the salary cut? Ask me when my first student loan payment bounces." and about taking a job where success is measured in people helped instead of profits generated. That's the part I'm most excited about. Sarah shut down the engines and turned in her seat with a grin that could have powered the entire airport. Emma Rodriguez, it's been an honor flying with you. The honor was mine. Sarah, what you did yesterday, helping me find the courage to choose authentically instead of safely, that's going to change everything. Just remember, courage isn't a one-time decision. It's a daily choice to keep flying toward what matters instead of what's comfortable. We exchanged contact information and promises to stay in touch. As I gathered my belongings, the same briefcase I'd carried that morning, but somehow it felt lighter. Sarah handed me a small wrapped package. "Open it when you get home," she said. At my apartment, I sat on the couch surrounded by the granite countertops and corporate success symbols that had once defined my life. Sarah's gift was a small compass with an inscription on the back, "For finding true north when all other directions lead to someone else's destination." My phone rang. My mother. "Emma, honey, we heard what happened. Are you okay?" The conversation lasted an hour and covered everything from financial planning to family disappointment to the radical concept that success might not be measured exclusively in salary figures. My parents didn't understand my decision, but they heard something in my voice that had been missing for years: genuine enthusiasm for Monday morning. 3 months later, I was standing in a mobile clinic parked outside a community center on the Navajo Nation, helping a grandmother access arthritis medication that had been financially impossible until we negotiated a compassionate use program with the manufacturer. As I watched her flex her fingers without wincing for the first time in months, I thought about Sarah's question: "Are you flying toward something or away from something?" I was definitely flying toward something. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "How's the view from your new altitude?" I typed back, "Perfect visibility. Thank you for teaching me how to change course." That evening, I called Margaret Chun. "Emma, how's the nonprofit world treating you?" "Like coming home to work I was always meant to do." "Margaret, why did you really orchestrate that flight with Sarah?" Her laugh was warm and knowing. "Because sometimes the best leaders are the ones brave enough to leave when their principles conflict with their paychecks. I needed to know if you were that kind of leader." "And David tells me you've helped 3 communities access medications they couldn't afford before your advocacy." I'd say you answered my question beautifully. 6 months after that flight to nowhere that became a flight to everywhere, I was training other pharmaceutical industry refugees to use their insider knowledge for patient advocacy. The work was harder than marketing, paid significantly less than corporate consulting, and required more courage than I'd known I possessed. It was also the first job I'd ever had where I never once dreaded Monday morning. Sarah still flew charter flights between Phoenix and the coast, but now she occasionally volunteered to transport medical supplies for our mobile clinic program. During one of those flights, as we delivered insulin to a remote community clinic, she looked back at me with that familiar pilot's grin. "Any regrets about fastening that seatbelt?" "Just one," I said, watching the desert landscape scroll past below us. "I regret waiting so long to ask where we were really going. Better late than never. Besides, the best destinations are always worth the wait." As we banked toward home, I realized that Sarah had been wrong about one thing. She'd said the most dangerous flights were the ones where you're flying to the wrong destination. The truth was simpler. The most dangerous flight is the one you never take because you're too afraid to change course. But once you find the courage to fasten your seatbelt and trust a pilot who's willing to divert from the scheduled route, you discover that the view is infinitely better when you're finally heading where your heart was trying to take you all along. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.